Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Living in Switzerland. The series is brought to you by Rigby. We are a staffing and project services company based in Zurich. If you or anyone you know of is looking for a new role in Switzerland, or if you're looking to hire, let us know. We'd be happy to help. The best way to do that is by going to rigby.ch/apply and filling out the form. Then, if we have anything that might be of interest, we'll gladly let you know.
Hello and welcome back for another episode of the Expert Guide to Your Life in Switzerland. This is Daniel from Rigby. We're a staffing and IT services company based in Zurich.
And I'm Diccon. I live in Bern and write books about Switzerland.
We are two Brits who both moved to Switzerland around the same time in 2005. And in this series, we'll be talking a bit about our experiences of living here. Today's episode is all about putting your foot in it from a cultural point of view and getting things wrong.
It's always hard when you move to a new country and don't know the rules, especially because many of them are unwritten and no one tells you them. And even if you've lived here a while, there are still minefields to negotiate. And one of the biggest ones I found when I moved here was language. How did you get on with being an English speaker here, Daniel?
Right, well, we signed up for a course soon after we arrived and we stuck at it for a while.
A course to learn German, I presume, not to learn English.
No, it was a course to learn German, and I'm glad we did because it really helped a lot. But one thing I would say is that we should have stuck at it for longer because the finer points of German grammar can be quite complicated. It can take a while until you feel like you have a firm grip on that. But, you get there eventually.
Yeah, I agree that I was in the lucky position that I got a job where I had to speak German when I worked in the bookshop. But there are still the classic false friends between English and German. I think English speakers do have an advantage when you're learning German because some words are the same, like hand is hand or house is house, even if it's spelt differently. But then you get words which still trip me up sometimes. So, for instance, I got an invitation, fairly formal invitation, and it said dress code smoking. And I had never heard this word, and I thought, I don't smoke. Can I even go to this event? And I had to ask Gregor. I said, what are they talking about? He said, well, it's what you should wear. I said, yeah, I can't wear a verb. He said, yeah, but a smoking, it's like a black jacket with a bow tie. And
Tuxedo.
it's like, oh, it's tuxedo or black tie or dinner jacket, whatever you want to call it. Definitely not smoking in English anyway. And of course, the classic that everyone experiences at some point, especially if they live in the German-speaking part. The first time a friend of mine asked me for my handy number, and I was standing there thinking, well, what's a handy number? Well, 27 isn't bad because we need it once a month. So I said 27. And he said, that's a very short number. You must have a very special mobile phone. And then, of course, I realized that handy is a mobile phone, which is actually a really good use of the word because mobile phones are handy. So I think false friends like that trip people up quite a lot. Even if you've been here a while. My classic, which I actually put in Swiss Watching, my first book, and I always read out when I do events, even though it makes me look really, really stupid. Just to let people know that even if you're speaking with someone who speaks wonderful English, sometimes there's just little bits that go astray, and it all comes down to a little difference in pronunciation. And I'll just read the little bit quickly. In case you haven't heard it. It's when I worked in the bookshop and a customer came in, spoke in English. I need a book on cheeses. Okay, I'll show you what we have. In the cookery section, I get out 3 books on cheese. Customer shaking her head. Not cheese, cheeses. I'm wondering if cheese actually has a plural in English, but I use it in the hope that it will help. So you're looking for something about cheeses, I say. Yes, she says. Books on holy cheeses. Ah, I say you want something on Swiss cheeses. Customer looking at me as if I'm stupid. There is no Swiss cheeses. I'm now trying to keep my temper. I say, we have something on Swiss cheeses. Customer now very irritated. Cheeses was not Swiss. Cheeses was the son of God. Now, of course, for a lot of Swiss ears, there's no difference between a ch and a j. And a lot of people have heard me read that out and think there's the same word. But if you grow up in England, obviously there's a big difference between a ch and a j. And so even when you're concentrating and you both think you're speaking the same language, I think pronunciation can let you down sometimes and lead you into dead ends. Have you had any experience of that?
Yeah, there are so many false friends. I always remember one time a woman I used to work with told me that that morning she became an email.
Yes, I had that in the bookshop as well. I'd like to become a present. And I thought, well, you're a bit big to gift wrap. But it works the other way around, of course. I always forget that becommen means get. And so then I'm thinking, what's the word for get? And I end up usually saying kriegen instead of becommen because it just sounds weird. And then there are just basic mistakes. I remember a friend of mine, when she was learning German, she said she embarrassed herself completely by telling her neighbor that she had some rubbish to put out, and she showed this giant bag of rubbish, and she said it's full of Durchfall, which isn't exactly the same word as Abfall. I'll leave people to Google both those as to what she actually said. I think what's harder, actually, mostly language mistakes like that, they can be amusing, they can be a bit embarrassing, but they're not that frustrating. I think what's much more frustrating for me is the red tape. And I know every country has red tape, Britain included, but here the red tape just seems to be redder. I don't know why, or maybe it's because it's amplified by the language. Before we did this podcast, I actually asked readers and listeners of ours on Facebook to send in their stories. And one woman wrote in and said when she first arrived, she didn't realize she had to register with the local community on arrival, which every foreigner has to do. And so she was completely shocked when the police turned up one day at her on her doorstep, demanding why she hadn't registered. And even worse than that, they had sent a letter to her home address back in Britain. So, of course, her parents were having apoplexy that there was a letter from the police saying she was in trouble because she hadn't registered. So I think it's just little bits of that, which, again, hopefully someone tells you or you've read somewhere, but not necessarily. And it's really a case of learning by doing and hoping you don't fall foul of the authorities. Have you made mistakes like that? I'm sure you haven't, of course.
Well, no, nothing exactly like that. But I mean, one mistake that we made early on was to throw our rubbish away in an ordinary bin liner, just like we were used to doing at home in England.
Shocking.
And I tell you, not just for the sake of the story, but actually one of our neighbours fished the bag out of the bin. And they're quite high, these bins. So they're nearly, let's say, 1.5 meters high. And the bin was quite empty, meaning that she needed to lift the lid and almost kind of climb in to get the bin bag out. And she opened the bag and she found a letter or something with our name and address on it. And she came and knocked on the door and explained to us that you're not allowed to do that. And it was only then that we learnt that you're supposed to buy the white Turdi-Tekli to throw rubbish away.
Yeah, we have blue ones. And they do it quite cleverly. So the next, I'm in Bern, and the next Gemeinde along is Könitz, and they have brown ones or grey ones. So you can't even use ones from next door if they're a bit cheaper. And it's the same with recycling. I think you have to be quite careful. You have to bundle your paper recycling quite carefully. I've seen in Bern, people just put their paper recycling inside a paper carrier bag from Migros and then tie the handles so it doesn't fall out. Generally, it's not collected. And even worse than that, a sticker is put on it saying unfit for collection. So all your neighbors know that you don't know how to bundle your paper. So, and of course, I did the classic, the complete classic that a lot of foreigners do when they first arrive. I was being very good. I was recycling everything. I took all the bottles we had. Not that I'm an alcoholic or anything, but we had a party. And on a Sunday, I had time, so I took the bottles to the bottle bank. I only got 3 in, and of course, each one crashes in. And this woman appeared on her balcony near the bottle bank, started shouting and gesticulating.
Yep. Not on a Sunday.
Not on a Sunday. You can't save the planet on a Sunday. You have to wait till Monday. And that's I think, the reason why Switzerland functions so well is that there are rules and 99% follow the rules. And so everything works. But every now and then when you don't follow the rules or you don't realize what the rules are, do I sound like Boris Johnson? I didn't know that there were rules and no one told me. Then someone tells you, sometimes nicely, sometimes not so nicely. I think the worst example I had of coming into contact with the rules was when I had to renew my C permit. So B permit is when you first arrive generally, and then permanent residency is C permit. And no, actually I had to change from B to C, and I didn't realize I'd been here 5 years. So I went to the Fremdenpolizei, the alien police, as I like to call them, and waited my 2 hours in the queue, as always. And then I had all the forms filled out. I had the new photograph. I had something from HR because I was still working in the bookshop then. I had a statement from Gregor, my partner, that we were still together, and I had all the paperwork. And obviously he had read through it all, so it was all perfect. And I gave this woman all my forms and everything, and she was stamping them all and checking them all. She said, "Oh, this is great. And you speak German. It's so easy." And then she was just about to finish it all. And she looked and said, "Oh, you've been here 5 years and you have a job and you're stable and you speak German." She said, "You can get a C permit." And I was like, "Great." I had no idea what a C permit was in those days. But I was like, "Great, that sounds good." She said, "Okay." She put all my stuff to one side. She took out the C permit form and said, "Now, I need a photograph. I need a statement from your HR department. I need a statement from your partner." And I said, "Well, they're all there." She said, "Yes, but that's your old application." I said, "But I haven't moved house in the last 2 minutes." That never tell jokes or make flippant remarks if you're dealing with authorities in Switzerland. And she just stared at me and didn't say anything. I said, "Are these papers still mine?" Meaning the B permit application. She said, "Yes, of course." So I took them, put them in my lap, and then gave them to her without the B permit form. And she said, "But I know." And I just looked at her and I thought, I'm not going to get anywhere here, and they're going to deport me for trying to cheat the system. So I went away, got all the same stuff again, went back the next day.
Waited 2 hours.
Luckily, only waited an hour and got a very, very nice man who just processed me in about 2 seconds flat. And so I think it's always a case of, if you first don't succeed, try again. Mm-hmm. And always realize that you are the person trying to fit in. You are the immigrant, you are the outsider. So you can rail against it a little bit, but at some point you have to realize that you have to give in and just go with the flow. Otherwise, you'll be angry the whole time. I think it's a bit like opening hours. When a lot of people, when they first arrive, the opening hours, which are kind of stuck in 1982, really frustrate people, especially if you come from the US or London with 24-hour shopping. And it's like, why does everything shut at 7 or 8? Why aren't they open on Sundays? And it can become a big thorn for some people, but I actually really like it now because you have this work-life balance. Mm-hmm. Okay, you have to remember that the day before a holiday is a Saturday because a holiday is a Sunday. So the day before Good Friday, everything shuts early because Good Friday, and it gets complicated. But you can then enjoy not going to IKEA on a Sunday, which is a bonus in my book. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you struggled with opening hours or even more basic things like laundry room rules.
Oh, sure. Opening hours was definitely a shock. It took at least a couple of years for us to adjust to that, I think, coming from London. But yeah, I think we're used to it now, and we even appreciate it if it means that people won't approach you on a Sunday. Except for the people from what used to be called the Billag.
Oh, yeah, the TV license.
Yeah, so that's another thing that we didn't know about when we first arrived, that you had to have a TV license, and they'll come and knock on your door on a Sunday.
Yes, and it's not that cheap. I mean, people moan about the TV license in Britain at £180 a year or whatever, and here it's 360 francs. So
whether you use the TV or not.
Whether you use the TV or not. I'm a big fan of TV licenses because it means we don't end up with really, really commercialized TV if you don't want it, or really politicized news. We actually get decent news from SRF. I think laundry rooms are a bigger deal for a lot of people. We're very lucky. We live in a building which is unbelievably liberal. We can do our laundry on a Sunday, which for a lot of people is verboten. And the laundry room's never locked. But again, it's fitting in with your surroundings, trying to get on well with your neighbors, so don't have loud parties at midnight and things like that. And for some people, it feels like control freakery, but I think it's actually a bit more about respecting other people's free time or downtime or privacy. I don't know if you rail against things like that.
Oh, you mean the laundry room? Yep, sure. I can definitely remember early days, one of our neighbours coming to knock on the door and saying that we left our things hanging for a few hours too long. All these stories from the old days, it really sounds like we must have been such a nuisance for our neighbours. Hopefully we weren't that bad. But yeah, I think we've adjusted to it now. We've made peace with it. And it's just the way it is, unless you're one of the few people here who has their own washing machine.
Well, yes, you have to be relatively well off or own your own house or live in your own house and not in an apartment block for that. I actually quite like the fact that we have a communal laundry. It cuts down on the number of washing machines there are, and so the waste of when you have a new one. It means we have a slightly bigger machine than I had when I lived in London and had a small machine under the sink, so that it's more effective for doing larger loads, and so you use less detergent, less water. I guess it's a bit more eco-friendly. There is, of course, the whole issue of etiquette and how you greet people. And I made that mistake because no one told me. I mean, in England especially, or in Britain especially, we're not that forward. We tend to, if it's very formal, the host or hostess will take people around and make introductions. Or otherwise, you just end up chatting to someone, and by the end of the conversation, you realize that you don't know their name. That's a very British thing to do. Whereas here, the first time I went to not even a party, it was kind of like a standing dinner. These days, I know it's called an apéro riche, so a cheese and wine party, basically, with lots of nibbles. And I didn't know anyone apart from the two hosts. I'd only just arrived. So I did what most normal British people would do, is I got a drink and went and hid in the corner. And certainly didn't go up to people and introduce myself. That would be very, very forward, almost American. And then my boyfriend came, literally I was there half a minute. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just being quite modest and polite." He said, "No, you're being really rude." I said, "How can I be rude? I'm not speaking to anyone." He said, "Exactly, you have to go around and introduce yourself to everyone." And I learned this is this weird thing, because Swiss people generally are quite reserved, quite modest, but at events like that, or even business meetings, I've had the same experience. The first thing you do is go around to everyone who's in the room, make eye contact, shake hands, and say, "Hello, I'm Diccon."
Yeah,
hello, I'm
funny.
Diccon. It is really weird. It's almost counterintuitive. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And we Brits do the opposite.
Yeah. And it's considered really rude if you don't do it. I remember when we were at my sister's wedding in Britain, Gregor went round and introduced himself to all my sister's in-laws, and they were like, "Who is this?"
That was weird.
This habit almost of etiquette of introducing yourself, I think this is the real reason why Swiss people are always punctual. It's nothing to do with timekeeping. It's if you arrive first, you get your drink, you stand there, and everyone who arrives after you has to do the round of introductions, whereas you just stand there and have a nice time. And this is the real reason why, if invitations say 7 o'clock, Swiss people are there at 7 o'clock. They don't want to have to do the round of introductions. I've worked this out. This is actual Swiss mindset. It's all about etiquette rather than timekeeping.
Oh, that's interesting. I think you might have something there.
And I think the most embarrassing situation I've managed to put myself in was the whole saying cheers thing at a dinner table, because, of course, from Britain, I mean, we just hold up the glass and say cheers, everyone, and it's a communal thing. We all raise glasses and then we start drinking or eating or whatever. And I did that at a dinner party before I knew any better. And everyone literally looked at me like I was running naked around the room. And Gregor whispered to me afterwards. He said, "You have to wait for the host to start to say zum Wohl or cheers or salute. And then you have to clink glasses with every person around the table, make eye contact, say cheers, Daniel. Use the name because you learnt it when you first arrived, so you know everyone's names." So I learned very quickly that I do it every time now.
Yeah, this is just one of those things that has to be learnt the hard way, because you don't know until you know.
No, and also I think the interesting thing is, of course, for many Swiss people, they grow up with them. My nieces and nephews have learned to say cheers with their plastic beakers from the word go, and so it's second nature. So you think, well, surely the rest of the world does it the same way as we do it. So no one thinks to tell you. This is why we had in the Expert Guide to Your Life in Switzerland, we actually put a whole section in about etiquette and when to use du or sie or tu or vous, when to give up your seat on the bus, when to say cheers and how to say cheers, things like that. Because it's those little things which make you feel like once you've mastered them, you feel like you're fitting in. And while you keep making mistakes, you feel like an outsider.
That's it. That's exactly it.
And one thing I can't comment on is, of course, children, because I don't have any, never will have any. The closest I get is nieces and nephews who I look after for an hour and then send back.
Hand them back.
Hand them back when they get annoying, which is usually quite quickly. But our friends on Facebook have sent in some stories about children. So yes. Jessica said, my 2-year-old daughter got a slap on her hand from an old lady for picking a daisy in the street. Mm-hmm. Now, I can understand that because a lot of flowers here are protected. And I have actually told people off for picking flowers, not in the street, but up on mountains. They see a nice lady slipper orchid and want to take it home and pick it. And that is actually illegal here. So that I can understand, but obviously a 2-year-old doesn't know the difference between a protected flower and a weed. Usually they prefer the weeds, I think. My nieces love dandelions. Melody says, I had so many instances at the krippe, and the krippe is a kindergarten. For example, I gave my daughter salted crackers and flavored yogurt for weeks before I got a letter saying that these were not allowed because they were salt and sugar in them. Apparently, only foods allowed are whole grain crackers or bread, fruit, and unflavored yogurt. It's hyper healthy. And Kay was also told off. She was told off by 2 older women sitting behind her in the tram because she was teaching her child to read. A is for apple, B is for bear. Now, that doesn't sound particularly bad, but you have to remember that Kay's child was 2. And generally, children here learn to read at a much, much later age and are not forced to, as the old lady. You're forcing your child to learn to read at far too young an age. And again, it's not right and wrong. It's just different expectations. A little bit like the friend of mine who was told off for walking her children to school because she was emotionally stunting their growth and not giving them independence early enough. And her feeling was, well, they're 7. They're not really in a fit state to walk to school on their own along a busy road. So I'm going to walk them to the school gate. And she was actually taken in by the principal and told off for setting a bad example to other children. So, and the whole area of childcare and education and raising your children is a minefield because it just depends where you grew up, how your parents brought you up, and what the society around you expects. It's like I find children here quite uncontrolled sometimes, like running up and down trains, running around restaurants. It's like being in Italy, which you don't really expect from controlled Switzerland, but it's kind of like, well, just go with the flow, let children do what they want. So I think all the time, sometimes you can laugh at things, sometimes they annoy you, sometimes you get embarrassed, but anytime you put your foot in it or break the rules or start getting irritated, I think you just have to step back and think, well, I'm the one trying to fit in. I'm not going to change the whole of society and history. So either I learn to live with it, learn to like it, or I'm going to be unhappy forever.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about our own experiences with walking the kids to school and the flavored yogurt and all the things that you're allowed and not allowed to take to school. So yeah, we've been there and done that. I have to say though, at the Hort, they seem to serve the kids spaghetti with ketchup most days, as far as I can tell.
Is that shocking or is that good?
No, it's just because of all the talk of healthy eating at the krippe, and that it seems to go somewhat out the window when they get to primary and secondary school.
Oh, I see. Well, there is that, but you could argue that spaghetti with tomato sauce, I mean, especially if you're a Jamie Oliver, spaghetti with tomato sauce is relatively healthy compared to chicken nuggets and chips.
Yeah, and sausages.
Or sausages and pizza and chips. Yeah.
Which is what we have, baked beans.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say that spaghetti pomodoro is actually quite a healthy choice compared to what children get in primary school.
Spaghetti with ketchup.
Spaghetti ketchup, yeah. But definitely a step up from fried food en masse. But I can't possibly comment because I don't have children, haven't been near a school apart from to give talks, and then they don't feed me when I'm there.
Yeah. And how about queuing, Diccon? I know you had a few things that you wanted to say about queuing.
Oh, queuing. I think just because I'm British, queuing must be in my DNA. You probably feel the same.
Yep.
I quite happily stand at a bus stop and make a queue of one if no one else is around.
Yep.
Because it's just the orderly thing to do. And for such a orderly, polite country, I really can't understand how the Swiss haven't learned to queue.
Yes, it is a strange paradox.
It is a paradox, and it's one which used to frustrate me just because from where I came from, but now it kind of fascinates me. I stand back and watch this rugby scrum that takes place every time the tram doors open, or the sort of bun fight you get to get on a cable car, because all the tourists are politely queuing, and the Swiss do this wonderful sidestep. Gregor has perfected it, of looking like you're not queuing, and of course you're not, but then you actually get to the head of the queue. And
it has to be seen to be believed. I mean, I've been here for 17 years now, and every time it's like it's the first time.
And the time I noticed it most was, you kind of get used to it here, of old ladies elbowing you out the way to get a seat on the tram, and you're trying to get off and things like that. But when we were flying back from Spain once, there was a queue at check-in for Manchester, and it was this lovely orderly queue with gaps for people to pass through, and it went round corners at right angles, a very, very British queue. And the queue, I say in inverted commas, for the Swiss check-in desk was just a blob of people, all sort of shuffling and sidestepping and trying to get there first without looking like they were queuing. And I just turned to Gregor and said, British queue, Swiss queue. And he was like, yes, finally, I understand. What do you mean? And again, you can laugh about it. You can get annoyed. You can do a very British reaction of when someone pushes in or doesn't queue properly. That's the way we deal with non-queuers. It's basically you tut and sigh, or actually point out there is a queue here, in sort of passive-aggressive tones, which is completely lost on anyone who's not British. They just think you're a little bit strange. So,
or they would say, "Verstehen alle an."
Yeah, but then some things here are very, very polite. So if you're sitting in the train and you've got empty seats all around you, someone will come and say, "Ist da noch frei?" And it's like, is that still free? And I'm like, well, unless the invisible man is sitting there, of course it's free. But it's lovely that you are, so that you can sit opposite me. Yeah. But that took a lot of getting used to. And I was thinking, am I misunderstanding? Are they asking if I'm traveling with 3 other people who happen to all be in the toilet together, or in the buffet car, or whatever? But no, it's just very polite. It's very nice. And I've got used to it. And I actually do it myself now, which works fine in Switzerland. But
I do too.
Don't do it in England. I've done it in England. Got on the train going up to London from my parents and asked a woman if anyone was sitting there. And she just looked at me like I was mad, because of course there was no one sitting there.
Yes, you'll probably get a sarcastic response or something like that.
Exactly.
Here's one. What about going around in England and wishing people the equivalent of Guten Appetit every time food is served? We just don't do that.
Well, yes, and we don't really have a translation for that. We say, have a good meal. It makes it sound like an order.
Yeah, but here, if you don't wish people in Gotha when food is served, they'll think you're uncouth.
Gotha, yeah. Yes, and again, my Swiss niece was over staying with my parents, and she noticed, she said, your family is really rude. First of all, they didn't introduce themselves to everyone who was there. And then second, they didn't wish everyone a good meal before we ate. And they didn't say cheers properly. It was just a disaster. And I was like, well, yes, in Swiss terms, it was a disaster, one after the other. And we were horrendously rude. But in British terms, it was just completely normal. So it's horses for courses, really. You have to get used to whatever is the local etiquette. And then you just have to forget it when you go abroad, because otherwise you do stick out like a sore thumb. That's probably a good place to end.
All right, yes, agreed. We'll leave it there for this month.
And thanks to you for listening. We'll include links in the show notes to our guest and to further materials about some of the topics that we've spoken about today. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Once again, this podcast was brought to you by Rigby. We're a staffing and project services company here in Zurich. If you would like our help either to hire or to be hired, let us know. Best way to do that is by going to rigby.ch/apply and filling out the form. You can also sign up for our newsletter at rigby.ch/newsletter to receive our Living in Switzerland guide. We'll send you 1 email per month about expat-focused news and jobs in Switzerland. So thanks, and until the next time.